Yeah, the media reports definitely seem more likely just to keep NATO populations on side of while there's a cost of living crisis going on in pretty much everywhere, Europe, UK, I'm not sure about the US, I'm sure in certain parts, that we keep sending billions. I think it's just, oh no, Ukraine do have a chance. Russia isn't doing
Right.
well. I guess this money isn't in vain. It's, defending a good cause. I think it's that, I mean, the Telegraph, I don't really follow too much, obviously, the newspapers, but just when it pops up, the Telegraph seem to have one pretty much every week
Right.
about. But I'm going to move to the Nord Stream question, as the media reaction to that was interesting initially and since, because it's been pretty much radio silence, which, there was the debate, did Russia do it? Did obviously
Right.
a NATO country do it? But the reaction since of basically silence, the fact there's an investigation being done by Denmark, Sweden, and Germany all separately. They're not doing a joint one, all separately, and it's been complete, obviously, silence. You've had the Polish member of parliament at the time who posted that nice picture on Twitter
Right.
thanking the US, who actually has in his profile picture on Twitter a picture with Joe Biden, which was obviously interesting. What are your thoughts on the Nord Stream pipeline? Obviously, since there has been accusations that it was Britain rather than
Hmm.
obviously the US, I'm open to who it could be. It could be Ukrainians on behalf of, the Americans, the British, or it would be a big risk, us doing it directly, but who knows? There was that training going on that people have pointed out with the British and American deep diving for
Yeah.
mines and those things. So, what are your thoughts on it? I'm keeping my mind open to. I'm not going to say it was one person, but if you was a betting man, who
Oh,
would you
I would. It would
point the finger to?
a coordinated effort. A coordinated effort by the Americans, the British. I can't imagine the Danes weren't somehow at least aware of it. As well as too. I mean, you've got a number of look, these smaller European nations, they want to matter. They want to be part of the big club. They want to take part in these things. And you look at the Danes' role in Afghanistan. They were very aggressive. They had a small detachment there, the Danes, but at one point they had the highest per capita casualties of any member of the ISAF forces in Afghanistan were the Danes. And when I was in Denmark speaking against the war, there was a lot of people were against the war, probably the majority of people. But you could also, there was this, uh, you know, uh, cadre within Denmark that saw like this is a way to make Denmark matter. And this is the same. You see this with Australians, the Swedes. I mean, all these nations, not the Australians so much, but the Swedes or the Danes, or they have their old statues of their old admirals, in their squares and stuff like that. They have a history of being empires,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so I think it touches something that we can matter again. So that's why I think it'd be very likely that their intelligence services, their special operations people, and then their foreign ministries would be involved in this to a degree. I don't know if it was the British or not. I don't know if we'll ever know. I don't know, and I don't know if the Brits have a capability to do something like that the Americans don't. But again, like I was saying earlier, on the special operations intelligence side, these guys have been working together in war now for 20 years. Very close relationships have been built. And so it would surprise me more if it was a single actor than if it was
Yeah.
a group of nations that did this. And I think there's certainly from the American side, one is you we hate those pipelines. The U.S. hates those pipelines, and we just had the news just broke a couple weeks ago that the United States is now the world's largest exporter of liquid natural gas. Right? And yeah.
Could you just touch on I'm sure everyone watching this is familiar, but what were the previous statements from American officials about the Nord Stream pipeline, and then touch on the LNG? And just before that, I thought I'd mention there was a Polish-Norway pipeline that opened fairly closely
Right, that's right.
after that. So you have Norway too. Obviously, Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, is from Norway. He was their old prime minister as well.
Right.
Interesting connections there. Just thought I'd touch on
Right.
that.
and I'm blanking on the name of the guy who was the previous NATO Secretary General. He was Danish. Yeah, no, I mean, so you had, I think that you had a number of comments that I have to paraphrase from American officials over the years with regards to Nord Stream, that it wasn't going to happen. We're not going to allow it to happen, and including the current president Joe Biden saying it's not going to last. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he basically said we're going to shut this thing down one way or another.
And he has the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz next to him, and they're in a press conference. And
right.
And then the report was like, "How are you going to stop it?" It's like,
yeah,
we'll find a way.
But if people remember when Donald Trump was president, he went to maybe it was a G7 meeting or whatnot a number of years ago, and he got into a big fight with Angela Merkel and everything else, and that had a lot to do with Nord Stream pipelines. Also had a lot to do with Trump was very upset that the Western Europeans were not upgrading their port facilities to accommodate American LNG tankers. You know, you go and you look back at the charts and the graphs on all this, and this development of liquid natural gas in the U.S. occurs in the last 10 or 12 years. And it coincides directly with the American shift that you saw in the Obama administration to where, yeah, we had a pretty difficult relationship with Russia. You know, certainly we discussed that earlier, you know, to where, but however, where it's being spoken about, where the U.S. administrations are clearly saying that Russia is a principal adversary. Whereas before there wasn't such outright hostility. And then, of course, you know, you had the utilization of Russia as a villain in the 2016 elections. I mean, so this is something that politically has been of great use, particularly the Democratic Party in the United States. But you see all that, and that coincides with the expansion around the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico and on the Atlantic of liquid natural gas facilities for export. I mean, it's just, you know, if you just the charts, just, you know, clear 45-degree line, you know, going up in the sense of like this expansion of the ability of the Americans to export LNG. And certainly by the summer of this year, the United States had exported more LNG to Europe, you know, than they had in the previous year or two combined, you know, in 6 months. So it was like all those kinds of things. And then, of course, now the United States is the major supplier of LNG in the world. And that has a very, very real impact on American policy. It drives things. I think that was a fundamental driver behind the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipelines, right? As well as then, too, this other aspect of like, we're going to make the Russians hurt. And we're going to show them that we can go places here that they can't protect, and that we can do, you know, we're going to do this. And then in like a month or so later, the Kerch Bridge was destroyed. Right. And I don't know what else is in next, but there will be something coming next. And, you know, and the thing is, you had today in the United States a disruption of our air travel. One of the systems the FAA uses that allows planes to take off stopped working. So big disruption of air travel today in the United States. And, you know, it's more than likely it's because it's a systems collapse that our Department of Transportation has been so weakened. It doesn't do any regulation, on and on. We've had all kinds of other issues with our aspects of transportation in this country over the years. So I think this is just one more aspect of a system collapse of our transportation infrastructure due to neglect, due to outsourcing, due to deregulation, you know, but due to corruption, you know. But there also is, too, the very real thought: was this a cyber attack? Was this something, you know? So whether or not those things actually occur, the thought's there. The likelihood is it. Was it more than likely that it was because we haven't invested in our infrastructure? Yeah, it's probably that. But if I was betting $1, would I put a few cents or 10 cents or 15 cents that it was a Russian cyber attack? Yeah, I would. You know, I mean, so you have that danger as we talk about escalation, about, okay, where does it go? How's the Russians going to respond? The Russians can't be seen as not responding, you know, both for internal reasons and external reasons. They have to show they're tough, but they also have people inside, just as the Americans, just as the Brits do, who are demanding a response. And so, yeah, it was incredibly stupid to do that. And you could see the reasons for it. And now the danger, of course, is where does it go?
Yeah, for the other officials who spoke about Nord Stream was actually Kalinda Rice. I think it was in 2014. You then have Trump having that argument with Jens Stoltenberg, where he's saying, we give all these NATO countries money to fight Russia, and then Russia is building a pipeline with Germany.
Yeah.
And then you even have Victoria Nuland in late 2021 also saying about bringing it to an end. So you've had lots of officials mentioning it. I'd like to ask you.
Well, one thing too is that for the Americans, you want to separate Western Europe from Russia as much as possible. I remember there was commentary early after the invasion because the Europeans were going to send $1 billion to Russia. I mean, to Ukraine, and the commentary was like, what does it matter? They're spending $1 billion a day on Russian energy. So they're going to spend $1 billion to Ukraine, but they're giving that every day to Russia. So there is that understanding that if you are serious about destroying Russia, if you're bringing it down, about collapsing the government and everything else, that you have to take away all its support. They've seen the disappointment. They have to be disappointed with how their sanctions didn't work. They have to be disappointed with where the war's at. So try and separate Europe as much as possible. And if that means destroying infrastructure, that's what you do.
Yeah, it's like Germany having an economic relationship with Russia means, they might become a better security one. There's more dialogue. And then they're like, Russia isn't this big foe that's made out to be. So I was going to ask, why do you think Europe puts up with this? Say it was the West, obviously, who blew up Nord Stream 2. Or Nord Stream 1. Germany must know this. So why would Germany put up with this? Why does Europe not just say, we're sick of the US, of their demands, that it's meant to be NATO, but it's basically the US and obviously being told what to do? Obviously, there was that Politico article, Europeans getting annoyed of the US basically profiteering of this with high, obviously, energy prices. Why did Europe put up with this? Did you see anything in your time when you was in the army with other NATO forces discussing this with you?
I think there are certainly those within European countries who benefit from who benefit from being the club. You have those who are neoconservatives, who are hawks, right? Who want to have their own strong military forces. There are those in Germany who really do want the German military to be getting 3% of GDP. Right. There are those who are true believers in this. And I think they, in some way, see this as a way then to eventually distance themselves from the Americans because they'll be strong enough to stand on their own. I mean, I've heard a lot of that in the sense that there is this pushback about being under the wing or the umbrella of the United States, that they don't want that. And to do that, to be that way, though, they have to build up and they have to strengthen. So that means going along with these things for the time being. There are others who believe in this. There are certainly those who see Russia as an adversary, who see it as, for historical, cultural, political reasons, as someone worth opposing in this sense. There are those who are romantics about the American ideal. I mean, I've met Europeans who believe that United States really does have the best interests for the world, and that may not be perfect, but it's better. So these are kind of those who fall into the end of history, class of civilizations camps. So I think there's a variety of reasons why there is support. Some of it's because it's expedient. The United States is a better bet than Russia or China or whoever, that we're a small nation. We have to ally ourselves with somebody. So there's kind of a realpolitik to it, right? Of like, well, we've got to choose somebody. We might as well choose the Americans, and then there's fear. We don't want to upset the Americans. The Americans will play hardball. I can tell you that I did work a number of years ago, 12 years ago, with the Dutch intelligence folks. And went to The Hague a couple times, and they told me that when Holland was considering pulling its forces out of Afghanistan, the Americans told them they would stop their shipping into Rotterdam if they did so. Right? So there's that fear. What are the repercussions going to be? So there's a lot of it. And then like anywhere else, like as you kind of brought up, everyone is facing this economic turmoil. You know, very few nations are not experiencing these brutal and really hard cost of living increases. It's a crisis for so many people. And so I think for many politicians, this is just isn't the fight they want to have. They've got other issues. They've got higher priorities. They've got domestic priorities. And this thing is too much for them. It's too. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can look at it to kind of understand why do they keep going along with it? Why do they continue to go with a policy that is madness, that is leading towards further escalation, that could lead into nuclear catastrophe, right? But also, too, is something that has worsened their own situations in the present, right? This war has made inflation much worse. So, I mean, yeah, why do they go along with it and everything and why they do it? I think there's a number of reasons for it. And none of them are good reasons, unfortunately.
I'm sure there's a few reasons. Like I remember reading, I'm not sure if it was Hillary Clinton's emails about Libya, and obviously Gaddafi was there. You know, a lot of their resources were nationalized, and there was just this whole bit all about all these European countries, so Britain, France, obviously spearheaded that in Libya. Then also Italy, Sweden, all these companies all just trying to get their hands on it. So the US obviously normally puts up the biggest military force, so reaps the biggest rewards. But then they know, the country might be privatized because that's obviously encouraged, and their companies can get in there. So I'm sure that might play a part, or a small part. I'm not sure, but as you said, there's probably many reasons. I thought,
I mean, certainly they want to make sure they get a cut. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could always think, oh, Europe could unite against the US, but there's going to be countries in there who go off and tell the US, hey, there's this big plan of all these European countries who basically want to, stop basically being your big ally. Britain, especially, would never go along with that because we basically obviously still piggyback off the Americans after obviously the British Empire collapsed to become a junior partner. So there's no way we'd ever. Yeah. I mean, we've been probably the strongest ally in this war. Poland's been pretty strong, but the Brits are right there with the US, and they might be getting a bit too big for their boots. If it was us versus Russia, we wouldn't stand a chance. But obviously, with the Americans, we can be a bit more brazen, can't we?
Yeah, and there's institutional reasons for it. There's personal reasons for it. I mean, certainly when we were talking about Stoltenberg before, and the Norwegians dropped the most bombs of any, if I'm remembering this correctly, the Norwegians dropped the most bombs of any NATO air force in Libya. And if you go back and you look at what was occurring, where the Norwegians were trying to intercede and serve as intermediaries, and were proving somewhat successful in that Libyan civil war, that is put to an end. And then the NATO bombing campaign begins, and the Norwegians drop the most bombs, and then Stoltenberg ultimately becomes NATO General Secretary. So there's a lot of personal valuation and aspiration and inducements that are involved in here. Just as you said, these nations all have their military industries, and it's important. If you want to matter, if you're the Royal Navy, and you want to justify new nuclear submarines or whatever, or if you want to justify having your ships conducting operations in the Strait of Taiwan, you need to be allied with the Americans. So I mean, there's all types of value to this. Whether it be to individuals or corporations or to institutions that make this an absolute gold